Hello and welcome back to another video, a video called More Conditionals. I was going to call it something else, but I think actually More Conditionals is kind of an appropriate title because we're going to be talking about more conditionals. Really what we're going to be talking about is just a smallish continuation of the ideas of the basic if statement. We're just going to be extending the powers of writing those if statements in a couple of ways that's really worth knowing about, kind of essential really, but is just an extension of the same basic ideas nonetheless. Okay, back to the screen, away from my face. So let's head over to the code. If you're coming from the previous video, I've changed my code back to be just the standard circle that moves across the screen. There's no if statements in here anymore. Just wanted to start with a clean slate so that there was not too much code on the screen at once. So if you remember, I've got my server running, I believe, over here, and if I reload the page, we have a circle that moves across the screen. It moves quite fast right now because I changed its speed. In the previous video, I might change it back to 1 for now. So we've got a circle, it moves across the screen. That's just so that there's something that's happening on the screen that we can kind of add to. So we talked about decision making previously, and I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just going to write some stuff in here for the fun of it. We talked about this idea that we might say if there is freezing rain, then, oh, and I think I put this on a new line because that's a cool thing to do, then I'm going to stay home. And that's a way that we make a decision in the real world, right? There's something that we check on. If this is happening, then this is what I'm going to do. So it's kind of like the question that we ask and then the response that we have. But a lot of the time we don't leave it at that. A lot of the time we have like, if it's happening, we're going to do one thing, and if it's not happening, we're going to do another thing. So we might add on to this, otherwise I'm going to my local cafe. For me, that's dispatch on Saint-Zotique for the record. So if there's freezing rain, if that happens, then I'm going to stay home. But I also have a plan if it's not happening. Which is that otherwise I'm going to go to my local cafe. And this is good because this expresses a little bit more about how we really make decisions, right? That we have kind of multiple plans based on what's happening. And in programming, it won't surprise you to know that we can do that as well. And in particular, this idea of otherwise, this sort of, if it's false, I'm going to do something else. If there isn't freezing rain, I'm going to do something else. That's called else in programming, okay? And the way that we use else is pretty straightforward, I think. So remember how we wrote the initial decision. So let's say we're going to control fill with our mouse position again. So if the mouse's x position is less than the width of the screen over 2. So if the mouse's x position is less than half the width of the canvas, that's the same thing as saying if it's in the left-hand half of the canvas, right? Its pixel position is less than half the width of the canvas. Then I'm going to do one thing, which is I'm going to set the fill to, let's just be boring and use red. Okay, so that's the kind of decision that we already know how to make. What if I wanted to do something specifically if this is not true, right? I could write another if statement down here that accounts for the other case. If it's greater than or equal to width over 2, then I could do something. But I don't need to do this, and this is kind of creating needless kind of mental work for me in terms of working out the kind of opposite condition of this one here. So instead what I can do is I can do that otherwise thing, which is basically what this highlighted if statement is saying. It's like this is the other case. What I can do is after the block of code that contains the actions if my if statement is true, so that's this block of code, I can do a return and I can say else. So else just means if this whole thing turns out to be false. And because it's got that defined meaning, if this stuff is false, we don't actually need to write any condition for else because it already knows what it's depending on. It's depending on this being false. And if this is false, then this doesn't happen. We get down to the else and we do whatever is in the else's block of code. And we'll set the fill to a different color. Let's be racy and we'll use green. Okay? So if the mouse's x position is less than halfway along the canvas, it's in the left side, fill with red. Otherwise, else, if that's not true, and that would mean we know that the mouse's x position must be on the right-hand side, because those are the only two possibilities, then we'll fill with green. Okay, let's go and make sure that that works. Reload. So red, because I'm on the left, I move over to the right, and it's green. Red and green, and red and green, and red and green, and red and green. And it's gone. That is how the else part of an if statement works. And that is literally, that's it. Okay? I don't know what to tell you. It is as simple as that. We can have an if statement that checks one thing, and if it turns out to be false, we can say specifically something we would like to do if it is false. And that's the else part. Okay? So that's else. The other thing that we can do if we have kind of even more complex decisions is that we can actually, instead of having an else, which only handles the case if our first condition is false, we can have kind of multiple backup plans. And to do that, we still use else, but we can say else if. So what if I wanted to divide the screen into 3? Again, I'm following the lecture notes here. So if the mouse X is less than the width over 3, so it's in the left-hand third of the canvas, will be red. Now, if I'm dividing it into thirds, I need 2 other things, right, because there's 3 thirds. So else if the mouse's X position is less than 2 times the width over 3, 2/3 of the width over 3, then I'm going to do something else, which is to set the fill to green. Goodness me, that was embarrassing. And if that's not true, it must be in the rightmost third. And so again, I don't need to check. I can just have my final else. A lot of these if, else if kinds of statements, they end with a final else. That's kind of the catch-all. You know, if everything else turns out to be false, then this is what I'm going to do. And what I'm going to do is set the fill to blue because I'm boring. So let's take a look at that. So here is the initial if. This is the very first thing that gets checked. Is the mouse's X position less than 1/3 of the canvas? Yes, if it is, set the fill to red, and none of the rest of this stuff matters. None of this stuff happens because this is true. If, however, this turned out to be false, so the mouse is not less than the width over 3, 1/3, then we do get, and we're going to get to this else, and we're going to check the next if, right? Else if this is true. So if that was false, tell me, is the mouse's X position less than 2/3 of the width? Now, the really important thing to recognize here is that in this else if, all it's checking is the mouse's X position less than 2/3 the width of the canvas, but we actually know something else when we're checking this, because we know that this first condition was false, or we wouldn't even be here in this else if. So we know that the mouse's X position is not less than 1/3 of the canvas. So when we ask this, we're basically actually saying, the mouse's X is not less than 1/3. Is it less than 2/3? Because if that's true, then we're in the middle third, and that means that we fill with green. And then finally, we get an else that catches all of the remaining cases. The remaining cases, if this is false, so the mouse is not less than 1/3, and this is false, the mouse is not less than 2/3, then clearly this else means that the mouse is greater than 2/3, or it's in the rightmost third of the canvas. Okay, let's go and look at that in practice quickly so that we know what we're talking about. Reloading because the circle has absconded. So left-hand third is red, middle third is green, and final rightmost third is blue. So we get a kind of a disco effect, which is what we want. Because really a lot of programming is about creating disco situations, I find. Okay, so this is a way that we can add multiple plans, basically, based on what's happening. Is the mouse in the left-hand third? If yes, then fill with red. Otherwise, if it's greater than the left-hand third, but it's less than 2/3, fill with green. And otherwise, if none of that is true, fill with blue. Okay? So that's pretty great. It may or may not be obvious, but we can add lots of these else ifs, right? Else if something else, do something else here. Else if some other thing, do something else here, and then we still can have our final if. So these if, else if, else if, else if, else things, they can go on for as long as you want, depending on how many kind of questions you've got to ask, right? In this case, we only have 3 things that we care about, which is the thirds of the canvas, so we just have these 3 decisions that we're making. Okay. So that is if and else if and else. We'll remove that and we'll talk about another thing. So, sometimes when we are making decisions, we want to make our decision based on more than one piece of information. So I'll return back to here. And let's just return to this idea of just a single if-then. So if there's freezing rain, then I'm going to stay home. Let's revert this. So if the cafe is open, so there is not freezing rain, I guess, so we're going to the cafe. Open. So if it's open and there is a window seat, then I'm going to work in the cafe. Something like that. It's depressing that I wrote work. I was trying to avoid that, but I wrote work because I think about work a lot. So here, the important thing is this condition, right? If we're asking two things now, we're checking two pieces of information. If the cafe is open and there is a window seat. So in particular, if the cafe is closed, there probably is a window seat because there's nobody in there. So this cafe is open is false because the cafe is closed. Window seat is true, but it kind of doesn't matter, right? Because we want both of them to be true. Similarly, if the cafe is open, it's true, but there isn't a window seat, this is false, then the whole thing is ruined again, because we're not going to go into the cafe. So when we say something like and in this context, we mean that we need both of these things to be true. And only if they're both true will we do the action that we're talking about, which is to work in the cafe. And of course, I'm talking about this because this is something that we can do in programming as well. So let's do something where we want to only change the color of our circle if the mouse is inside the middle third. To do that, we need to check that it's both greater than 1/3 and less than 2/3, right? And the way that we can do that is with nested if statements. So if circle.x is greater than 1/3 of the canvas, right? So that's the first part of what we need to know. Is it greater than the left-hand third? But then, once we know that that's true, we need to check another thing, which is it also less than 2/3? And the way that we can do that is quite simple. We can write another if statement. If circle.x is less than 2/3 the width of the canvas. So it's important, and this is an important moment, right? One of the things that we can write inside the code block of our first if statement is just another if statement, because we can put any code that we want inside these code blocks, absolutely anything we want. So first we ask, is it greater than 1/3 the width? If it is, if that succeeds, then we have another question, because we're not ready to act yet. Is it also less than 2/3 the width? And if that is true, then we can take our action and fill. Amazingly, let's suggest that we're going to do it with red. And I guess we're going to need a default fill here, because otherwise it's just going to fill with red forever. So let's set the default fill to just to be white. So it's going to set the fill to white, but then it's going to ask these questions, and if they come out to both be true, it's going to set the fill to red. So let's go and have a look and see if that works. So it's moving along, reaches the middle third, turns red, exits the middle third, and it goes back to white, right? So it starts out white because both of those if statements are turning out false. Then it turns red because they're both true. And then at the end, it turns white again because even though in that right-hand third, its position is greater than the width divided by 3, because it's greater than that left-hand third. The second one is false, right? It's not less than 2/3 the width. So we're able to get it to change color only in the center. So those are called nested if statements. It's fairly common to see this kind of thing happening. Okay, we've got one more thing that we need to talk about. This is something that you'll need to get used to over time, quite frankly, and that is the idea of logic. Now, we've already actually essentially run into this idea of logic, and you use logic in your life constantly. So it's not like it's actually something that's all that foreign, it's just formalizing it that can be a bit weird. So in particular, this and is basically a logical kind of a thing. Because what this and is saying is that this thing here on the left-hand side of the and this thing here on the right-hand side of the and, they both need to be true in order for my condition to work out to true, right? That's what the and does. It says, I need both of these things to be true. And you can, there are other ones, right? The other obvious one that you might immediately know is or. So this has changed the meaning of this question, right? If the cafe is open or there is a window seat, then I'm going to work in the cafe. This has a radically different meaning, doesn't it? So either the cafe is open, which is great, then I could go in and work there, Or no matter what, if there's a window seat, I'm going to work in the cafe. So the cafe might be closed, and I'm just going to, like, I don't know, smash open the door and go work in the cafe anyway, because the or means that I only need one of these things to be true. Okay? And those are the two sort of big logical ideas, and or. There's one other one which we will look at as well. So in programming, we write these things with special symbols. It's a little unfortunate because symbols aren't always the most friendly, but you can get used to them. So here with our nested if statement, we're saying if the circle's x is greater than the left, we're effectively saying and here, right? If the circle's x is greater than the width, and if the circle's x is less than 2 times the width, then fill. So we can actually do this on one line. So I'm going to grab this condition here, and I'm going to copy it out. And I'm going to turn this into a single if statement. So if the circle.x is greater than the width over 2, and the circle.x is less than 2 times the width over 3, less than the second third. So this is how we write and in programming. It's 2 ampersands. And that enables us to combine these two comparisons, right? Here's one comparison here. That can be true or false. Another thing here. That can be true or false. The and is saying I need both of these things to be true if I want to do the action, which is to fill in red. So this actually expresses exactly the same idea as the two if statements did. So if we go back and watch it, it does exactly the same thing. It reaches that middle third. That's when both of those things are true, so it goes red. And then when it leaves that middle third, one of them is false at least, and so it stops working. Okay? The or, the way that we write or, so I'm just going to replace this and, is that we use these things called pipe. The pipe symbol, you may or may not ever have used them. You actually use it to indicate spoilers on Discord. It's these two vertical lines. On my keyboard, at least, it's underneath the delete key, just above the backslash character, and you use two of them. Just like 2 ampersands, you have 2 pipes, and this means or. And so this is saying if circle.x is greater than the width over 3, or it's less than 2 times the width over 3. What does that mean? Let's go and look at it. So it's red, stays red, and then it's still red. So why is that? Well, all it's caring about is if one of these is true, right? So at the beginning, this one is true, because circle.x is less than 2 times the width over 3 at the beginning. It goes all the way through. Eventually, this becomes false when the circle moves past that second third. But by the time it gets there, this is true, and so it stays true. So it's actually not a super duper interesting thing. So we could instead express it like this. So I'm just changing the direction of these signs. So now we're saying if circle.x is less than 1/3, it should be red, or it's greater than 2/3, it should be red. This is basically the opposite of the and. It's going to be red in the left-hand third, not in the middle, and then red in the right-hand third again. Let's check that out. So red in the left hand, because one of them is true, then neither of them are true there, and then one of them is true there. So it goes back to red. Okay? So or means that you will do the action if either of them are true. Okay. There's one more symbol, and it's in some ways it's a really good one to know, but let's check it out. So the final symbol is called not. Not basically just makes something that was true false, and we draw it with an exclamation mark. We actually saw this with the does not equal symbol earlier. In order to apply it to this whole condition here, the not, we actually need the whole thing to be in parentheses so that it knows that that not is applying to all of the stuff inside these parentheses. Okay? So if not the circle is less than width over 3. It's kind of a weird question to ask, but it's basically saying if circle.x is not less than width over 3, okay? Which is actually the same thing as it being greater than width over 3, because that's how maths works. But this is a way that we can write things that involve negation, or saying that something is not true. So if we look at it, it's white until the first third, and then it's red, because now it is not less than the width over 3, okay? That is negation. So there's quite a lot to take in there with those symbols especially. These are things that I guess you do get more used to just as you see them being used, and we will be using them in all kinds of places. So pace yourself, especially with the logic stuff. The most important thing is to get really used to the if, the else if, and the else. But logic is super fun and exciting as well. That's all that we need to talk about in connection with the extra part of these conditionals. So I will therefore see you in the next video, and I'm looking forward to that.